Yeah, it's kind of like Leon Edwards and his inability to finish anyone.
Right.
And it's kind of like your inability to get to the fucking point.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's just like that. And like Leon Edwards, I deserve much more than I've been given. I've not received my due, and I'm constantly being disrespected everywhere I go, even though I'm so good.
What annoyed me the most about that Twitter thread is that you compared MMA fighting to painting. In essence, calling painting a lesser art that is not as nuanced as music.
No.
MMA fighters fight like they paint. Basically, they just slap paint all over the place.
No.
Instead of carefully blending together
MMA
paint.
A bunch of bitches.
The point is that painting is not experienced temporally.
It's
painting,
basically like it's essentially painting can be experienced temporally. Jackson Pollock paintings were experienced temporally. That's why he received so much criticism after the fact, because people call his paintings just pointless scribbles and just a bunch of like shit thrown at a wall, when in fact it was all about the experience that you experienced in real time, seeing him paint. So fuck you.
Well, there you go. Now there's an experiment against the form. However, as a piece of art completed, it's all there at once.
It's all there, but you also have to experience it by examining it from different angles. That's the point of art. You don't experience it from one angle.
You're right.
It depends on your mood and what you watched before,
right.
What you experienced before.
But there is no way to experience the story of a song at a glance. It can't be done. It only exists over time. That's the point.
Yeah, you can see paintings super easily all the time, and then they're just done, and that's why they're lame. I agree.
Yeah, they suck.
Paintings for losers.
It's for idiots.
Music is also basically just for idiots, because you just basically, I'm making music right now, and that's it.
No, you're not.
You can call it music because for someone,
yeah, but you have to hang around. You have to hang around for a long time to get to the end of it. So when you're listening to like a super rad Tool song, you have to be like, oh man, I have to wait for 12 minutes. Or if you're listening to the super awesome Mars Volta, you have to wait for them to like do all that stuff where it sounds like they're tuning up at the beginning and have a huge outro at the end, and that's what makes it better than painting.
Yeah, you have to wait for the
8-minute
intro to be done.
I was supposed to shout out one of my colleagues, Jack Hurley, who is going to be wrestling at a wrestling tournament, at a folk style wrestling tournament this weekend, and he's going to be walking out to Bones in the Well. And by
really?
the way, that's the name of the opening songs of Heavy Hands. If this is still recording and I'm actually being heard by our listeners.
Is he really?
Yes. I'm not being ironic
awesome.
right now. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
If anyone wondered what's the opening song to...
Yeah, did you hear that delay? Yes, Phil has no idea what the opening song is called. He just learned.
I don't know what the opening... No, I don't know what it's called, but...
Yeah, it's called Bones in the Well by a Cincinnati local band, The Hiders.
Yeah, and you can guess the name of the song in the beginning if you listen very closely.
Find the bones in the well, I believe, are the very first lyrics.
Find the bones in the
well. I told you. Find the bones.
That's going to be the intro.
I think so. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, as always, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, and we are joined, uncommonly, by a guest that I'm very pleased to have. He's currently muted himself. That's how unfailingly polite he is. Either that, or he is just ripping ass over there.
I was looking at porn.
He was looking at porn. He doesn't know how to mute his computer, so he mutes his mic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to mute my computer. I like listening to the sounds of porn. It offers a much fuller experience, you know.
Wow, what a great entry into this week's episode of Heavy Hands, courtesy of our honored guest, Tumen-Erdeni Tushin. How was my pronunciation?
Terrible.
Okay, Tumen
I hate you. You suck.
I'm just gonna say Tumen.
Fucking piece of shit.
You might know him from Twitter, if you are among his approximately 500 followers. As at Chungus.
That's a lot for a guy that lives in the middle of nowhere and lives in a fucking field.
Yeah,
I like to remind everyone every once in a while. It's a lot. It's quite a lot. You are currently engaging in colonialism and imperial hegemonic sentiments and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, I'm actually I'm actually delivering backhanded praise because more of you people listening to the show should follow this man. And then just ignore about 80% of his tweets because he never stops. His handle is at ChungusKhan03, but you may also know him from his podcast, Tengri Dome, which I had a very good time participating in, I don't know, a month ago or something like that. We talked about style and psychology and a topic that Phil and I have, and Pat before Phil, Dr. Pat, have discussed in great depth, but which I think we covered new ground and really enjoyed that.
Because my presence actually put a hard cap on how much stupid bullshit you could inject into the conversation.
That's right.
D&D archetypes and like trying to break fighters into things like classes like warrior, thief, and mage.
That's right.
I don't know what the fuck you were doing with Pat there, but
the thing about fighting styles is that the outfighter has more cantrips at his disposal than the pressure fighter. That's what really makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. And the technical sneaky counterpuncher, I guess, has higher initiative, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay, enough of that joke.
Higher critical chance.
Enough of this goddamn joke. This is Tumen. And we're very happy to have him here to discuss UFC 265, which took place over the weekend. All in all, feel I did a pretty solid job with this one, especially the two main fights, which we will be discussing once again on this week's episode, and then whatever from the undercard. You'll have to go back and listen to the vivisection to see how badly I predicted the rest of them. But Ciryl Gane versus Derrick Lewis, that one was a straightforward call. There were only two ways it could go, and it went one of them. Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz, I think Phil and I both identified pretty well how that fight was going to go, but only one of us was brave enough to pick the man who did indeed win.
Well, I actually picked Jose Aldo by knockout in the third. And
well, you were wrong too.
He came very close to it.
If anything, even stupider than Phil's pick.
True. Yeah. True. Makes sense. But
good. I'm so glad we got someone. We got someone on who could take the flak off me for dumb picks.
You gotta stick to your guns every once in a while. You gotta be bold, You wouldn't be able to progress if you don't stumble and on your first try, and you shouldn't be afraid of failing to improve later. So, if anything, you guys being afraid of making dumb picks just makes you
we have never been afraid to make dumb picks.
That is a gross misrepresentation of this show and its history.
We make the dumbest picks.
That's right. Nothing but.
Well, now that you've actually, admitted to doing that, I guess we can continue.
Tumen, could you go ahead and mute yourself again for just the remainder of my intro? I'm trying to get through it.
I'm currently looking at that picture of John Jones that's dressed in a ghillie suit.
All right, enough. We're talking about Ciryl Gane versus...
And, it reminds me of that scene in Star Wars Episode 6 where the Ewoks...
That's enough. We're talking about UFC 265 and its main event. First of all, Ciryl Gane versus Derrick Lewis. I don't know that we'll have a tremendous amount to say about this fight because, as I said, it played out in one of the two ways that it could. And even if it had played out the other, it would have looked much the same, until the very ending.
There's not much to say about the fight itself, but there's a lot to say about the concept surrounding the fight regarding the division itself and how heavyweight functions in general.
That's right. I think it's a fight that forces us to sort of examine the context of the heavyweight division and how it may or may not be changing now that it looks like Ciryl Gane versus Francis Ngannou is somewhere on the horizon. So, let's go ahead and just kick this off, talking about, how the fight played out. Tumen, you're so very eager to talk. I'm gonna take the reins off for just a moment and, ask you general impression of Ciryl Gane's performance. It's been called a masterclass.
So, welcome to Tengri Dome episode 18. And this is the post-fight breakdown for UFC 265. But,
he did his own fucking
there's
intro.
not much to say about the fight itself, really. It looked pretty much like any Derrick Lewis fight, but it's just that Derrick Lewis went on a baffling streak of wins for some fucking reason, and there's not much to take away from Ciryl Gane winning over Derrick Lewis, even though a lot of people who are high on Ciryl Gane, and I suppose it's understandable from a certain point of view, because heavyweight division is certainly very starved for actual, heavyweights who are kind of decent.
Yeah.
So, a good heavyweight is a bit of a perennial white whale for fight fans.
Right.
Especially MMA fans. But, Ciryl Gane basically did what he does all the time. And he didn't really address any of the, problems that I have with him in general. But he was basically able to win because Derrick Lewis is Derrick Lewis. He jabbed him up, nagged him with annoying kicks to the knee, and then stumbled upon leg kicks and decided, I guess I can leg kick him now. There was one moment where I started having my doubts about Ciryl Gane, and he demonstrated what I think wasn't a really good look, where Derrick Lewis started basically essentially plodding towards Ciryl Gane, and he kind of conceded space for no real reason. He walked him himself onto the fence. But nevertheless, Derrick Lewis, who is the farthest thing you can find in this sport from what you would call a round winner, didn't really capitalize on anything, because he never really capitalizes on anything, because Derrick Lewis, his whole thing, I guess you could call him a counterpuncher in the broadest sense of the word, in that he gets pieced up, and then when you think that he's more hurt than he actually is, or as it is in a lot of cases, he actually is hurt, as he seems to be.
Yeah.
Because you can read his emotions on his face. Yeah. And in his body language. He just kind of heavyweights cannot stop themselves from making stupid mistakes and picking exactly the wrong shots to throw during that moment, and he knocks them out. And I guess Ciryl Gane,
he made marginally better decisions when Derrick Lewis started pawing at his face and bending over and giving every impression he was ready to be killed.
Yes, and Derrick Lewis is basically an IQ test. And he is an IQ test in the sense that it's a test that decides whether or not you are actually, capable of having some kind of thoughts, not even higher thoughts, but just thoughts.
Can you take an opponent to the brink of a finish and still fight with some semblance of discipline? That is really the test of Derrick Lewis. Also, can you just maintain your composure and not try to grapple him? Which Ciryl Gane
pretty much
didn't. Really?
Ciryl Gane didn't make the stupidest thing that he could have done in this fight, and I guess that merits some credit.
It absolutely does. The heavyweight context, we're grading on a curve here, and Ciryl Gane is well at the top of that curve, as unimpressive as it might be.
There is a bump on the road, and Ciryl Gane is the foot that raises just 2 centimeters above the bump on the road. And is able to walk over the bump. But,
can you believe, Phil, this guy, can you believe this guy was making fun of me on Twitter yesterday for my tortured metaphors?
No, well, first of all, it's not my first language, and so any metaphors that I'm going to make are going to be tortured.
Certainly torture to listen to.
That's just how it is. And I'm going to torture the listeners with my non-native language. So I guess I apologize in advance. It's something I have to do every time to annoy people.
All right.
Into
Phil,
humble bragging about my English.
Phil,
Derrick Lewis. Well,
hold on. Now listen, we got to get something straight. I host this show. Okay.
Oh yeah, you do you?
We got to get something straight. I host the show.
Impression at first.
I also, I have the power to edit the people in this call. What are you going to do? You're going to send me a bunch of DMs if I remove you from the call? You're powerless. All right. You need to understand that. Phil, thoughts on Gane?
If this isn't the hegemonic American.
That's right.
Throwing his shade over an oppressed minority.
That's right.
Over poor little me.
That's right. Phil, fellow colonialist.
Yeah, I thought it was a good performance from Gane, as much as it was as much as it could be, like, he passed the test, like, completely flawlessly because he didn't get hit by anything. He finished Lewis instead of letting him hang around. And I thought, like, most of the little things that we saw were, like, they were, it was hard to, it was, apart from the fact, like, that, he gave, there was a part where he was just, there were a couple of points where he was literally just running away.
Yes.
But, it's heavyweight. I fully expect that to be what people do. As I said, like, he's basically built his career off, being able to do two things, whereas most heavyweights can do one. And basically he can feint, and he's got a good sense of distance and, like, foot speed. But I thought the way that he cranked up his low kicks was good. Like, he started off just throwing nothing on them so that they couldn't be countered, and then he was like, and he slowly escalated it up until the one which, sort of essentially ended the fight. And I thought he looked good in the clinch. I thought that was one of the points where the commentary team was actually, like, relatively on the money, like the fact that he was prioritizing underhooks. I mean, you could see that Lewis was still doing Lewis things, and that he was just waiting for the clinch to be broken so that he could swing really hard on the break.
Yeah.
But, Gane at least fought well there, and, I'm not going to say that he's stronger than Derrick Lewis, but he didn't get exhausted by clinching up with Derrick Lewis, and neither did, he was still able to turn and move him around. And all that's, like, good signs for fighting against someone like Ngannou, because we haven't seen Gane in tie-ups with anyone that he doesn't physically outclass before, to an extent that this wouldn't be like, insightful. So that was pretty much it. Lewis looked super bad and gun shy and like even worse than usual.
Gane found some championship medal in a cheeky fence grab. The one moment when Lewis did have a solid body lock on him and may have been able to take him down. He grabbed the fence just long enough to maintain his balance and get his own underhook in. That's championship.
Jose Aldo.
That's right.
That's something that you would call, like, veteran savvy from Derrick Lewis.
Right.
I mean, to Phil's earlier point about Gane finishing Lewis, I wouldn't strictly call it Gane finishing Lewis as Lewis deciding that he's finished.
Well,
because boy, did Derrick Lewis did not like getting jabbed up in the eye.
No.
In fact, so much so that he pretended that he was getting eye poked at several moments in the fight.
Even though I believe he poked Gane in the eye at least twice.
Yes. And kicked him very hard in the balls.
Yep.
This is pretty much his only significant strike of the fight.
Gane earned that fence grab, is what we're saying, all right? He deserves that one. You can't talk shit about it. Not only was it smart, smarter than Derrick Lewis's fouls, but, he took his lumps to get to that point.
Derrick Lewis fouls in the same way Conor McGregor fouls,
How's that?
Basically, Conor McGregor doesn't foul in any, like, crafty or intelligent ways. He just basically fouls when he's on the brink and when he's trying to survive.
Yeah, sure.
So basically what I'm saying is that I respect Derrick Lewis much more than Conor McGregor, and in fact I think Derrick Lewis is a better fighter than Conor McGregor because of that.
He's certainly technically better, yeah. I think, Phil, you really hit on something with the idea of, like, just, like, waiting for the thing to happen. Waiting for the wind to fall into his lap is the whole Derrick Lewis thing, He's
like an even worse Tyron Woodley.
Yes, basically. And except it's just the fact that it works more consistently at heavyweight, because most heavyweights are shit. And so it is meaningful that Ciryl Gane very clearly passed that test. He just didn't put the win on the table for Derrick Lewis to snatch it up. Partly through athletic ability. He's very fast. He's got great stamina, which no matter how hard you work on it, I think for most heavyweights, there's a hard limit on stamina that Gane does not seem to experience in the same way. But also partly for a level of technique that we also don't often see at heavyweight. He's got a good sense of distance management. He adjusts the distance as needed, not something that Derrick Lewis really knows how to do. He knows how to set up one attack with a different attack or a feint, a suggestion of an attack, and he showed some nice clinch mechanics, which I also enjoyed seeing, including some really like interesting, tricky elbows. He tried an over-the-back elbow comboed into like a cross elbow. That was kind of cool.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
nice.
That was kind of neat. I mean, the fact that he can go in there against nominally dangerous heavyweights and sort of play around really does say something about how different Ciryl Gane is by heavyweight standards. And you just always have to remind yourself that, like, he's still not flawless. That's the thing. Or, you know, not that anyone is.
Very much not so.
Not that anyone is. Even Jose Aldo. Even Jose Aldo is not flawless. But so
Ciryl Gane especially so.
So yeah, well, what are some things that Ciryl Gane did badly here that may someday, or potentially against Francis Ngannou, come back to bite him? Tumen.
Well, first of all, we would have to establish what is considered good at heavyweight and what is considered the baseline level of skill at heavyweight. And I think Phil established it very well by saying that most heavyweights are able to do one thing as opposed to the two things that Gane is able to do at any given moment. But it's still a far cry from the baseline level of skill that is expected when you actually, you know, go in and study fighting. If you try and learn how to fight, there's I think there are, while styles are they're a very individual thing, and one fighter will not fight like the other fighter, and it's never going to happen. Perfect matches is something that is impossible in fighting, but still, there is a certain baseline level of skill that is expected of a fighter to for him to be considered elite. And
or even actually good.
Yes, even actually good. And heavyweight, I would say, is in general, like, historically well below that line. And the reasons for that are, well, I guess we could get into the reasons later, but for now, the two major ones are lack of talent and lack of incentive for that talent to come into MMA. And that incentive is naturally just the fact that you're going to get hit in the head. And there are far more lucrative sports to pursue where you're not actively where you're not facing a person who is actively trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
So big athletic men are not as incentivized to go and pick up fighting as a career pursuit. And so naturally, heavyweight is, I think it would be, at this point, for any heavy hands listeners, it would not be a controversial thing to say that heavyweight is well below that baseline level of skill expected of an actually good or an elite fighter. And as such, Gane is certainly a lot better than a lot of heavyweights currently. And but the problems with him and the things that he showed, the alarming things that he showed in this fight were, as mentioned, his rudimentary understanding of ringcraft, and that any sign of danger that comes towards him will force him to overcompensate and move way farther back than he actually needs to do.
Yep.
And his control of distance is way better than a lot of heavyweights currently. But once again, it's all very exaggerated, and I think it's kind of indicative of the overall trend with heavyweight versus other divisions that are, I guess, better. In the sense that everything at heavyweight is exaggerated, every flaw is exaggerated, and every like positive trait that may be taken for granted at lower weight classes is something that will put you head and shoulders above the rest of your competition. And as such, Ciryl Gane's general problem is one of his biggest strengths is also his biggest weakness, in that he has a process through which he's able to rack up points and dominate the fight and control the flow of the fight through volume, if nothing else. This process doesn't really lend itself to, you know, finishing fights. It's a bit of a risk mitigating style, and I think we both talked about risk mitigating styles being simultaneously, ironically, paradoxically, more risky than actually finishing fights early, because it gives the full 15 minutes, the full 25 minutes in title fights for your opponent to maybe find a way to get back into the fight.
Yeah.
And at heavyweight, where everything is exaggerated, that spells tremendous danger for you.
Although, in this case, Ciryl Gane did what Leon Edwards never will. He finished the fight when it was prudent to do so. It would have been a really bad idea to let Derrick Lewis hang around. As hurt, as poor as his body language was, we all know what Derrick Lewis does. Not to mention the fact that Dan Miragliotta seemed to be weirdly invested in giving Derrick Lewis extra chances because of his hometown crowd. Did anyone catch that?
I suppose he finds Derrick Lewis very endearing person.
Well, we all do, but he paused what was essentially a finishing sequence to replace Derrick Lewis's mouthpiece. And then even though Derrick Lewis...
I said on Twitter, that was Derrick Lewis's finishing sequence.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Just when Gane was being like, I just need to pour it on and finish with this guy. Gane was just about to get knocked out. I stand by
it. He really ruined Derrick Lewis's chances. But then, body language wise, if I'm the referee, Derrick Lewis goes down to his hands and knees and covers up, making no effort to move. You can stop it right away. And he still didn't. I think I got the impression Dan Miragliotta wanted to give Derrick Lewis some chances there. That, Gane did not allow Derrick Lewis to take advantage of, which is something. That should be a feather in his cap, I think. Again,
I suppose it's a bit unfair of me to be a bit low on Gane with in regards to his recent performance, because he finished the fight, he won the fight handily, he was dominating the fight, but there are some things I would have liked to see from him that would kind of fuel me more encouraged about his prospects further at heavyweight in his title run. In that there are several avenues of attack that he didn't exploit, which I suppose, I guess fair enough, because he didn't want to get knocked out, which is Derrick Lewis is very susceptible to body attacks.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing.
In that Ciryl Gane has a pretty decent body kick, pretty hard body kick. And if he went to that earlier, I suppose he would have finished the fight. He could have finished the fight much earlier.
I would to think that a lot of the problems we did see from Gane are things that experience could help repair. Ringcraft is certainly something that benefits from cage time, and while Gane has gotten an awful lot of it for a heavyweight, he's still relatively inexperienced.
I would even go as far as to say that his current style resembles that of Robert Whittaker's, if Robert Whittaker never developed past the basic karate kickboxing style of fighting without any of the finishing threats that Robert Whittaker actually possesses, nor does he. I don't think we actually saw him defend against situations where he's up close in the kitchen against someone who's swinging them bungalows.
Sure.
And at heavyweight, one thing I would have to point out that historically, if you go back and look at heavyweight division, let's say in boxing, clinch matters a lot at heavyweight.
Yeah.
It matters a whole lot. And for example, fighters like Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko, who perhaps exhibited a style that is somewhat similar conceptually to what Ciryl Gane is trying to do, they relied very heavily on the clinch to defend themselves, and it's something that I would like to see Gane exploit more in the future.
Sure. But, a pretty good look for our first, what felt like our first extended look at the clinch. Again, low benchmark for technique, Derrick Lewis, but he's a strong man who's dangerous when you're...
hang up with this performance.
Yeah, but he's a strong man who's dangerous when you clinch up with him. We have certainly seen other heavyweights just self-destruct when they tie up with Derrick Lewis. So I take that as a good sign. I'd also like to say, again, grading on a curve. But, go on, Phil.
Yeah. There's always...
the other thing about people, about, the heavyweight division is that the UFC is literally the only place where you can fight against quote unquote UFC level opposition, which is not obviously the case for most of the other weight classes, because you'll often find that people have fought each other at welterweight or middleweight or any of the good weight classes. There's tons of regional promotions. Being the champion of a regional promotion is genuinely valuable at good weight classes, and sort of worthless at heavyweight. And yeah, so he's had 10 fights, at least, as a pro in MMA. He's had a bunch of Muay Thai fights, which I haven't seen. But, 3 of those are regional fights in Canada, because I think it was still banned in France at the time. And then the remaining 7 are all in the UFC, pretty much all against decent levels of competition. The one thing he hasn't fought is obviously any kind of meaningful wrestler.
Of which there's really only
that,
one.
And about that Muay Thai experience, it was under the shitty French rules where you're fighting with elbow pads and shin pads, and you're not allowed to do certain techniques. I think, and you're only allowed 15 seconds of the clinch or something like that, something stupid like that. So it's basically
awesome.
not Muay Thai at all.
Yeah, but I think he's pretty good, Ciryl Gane. Again, the heavyweight curve exists.
There's always this asterisk whenever you say that.
Of course,
he's all right for a heavyweight. He's
course.
crafty for a heavyweight. He's fast for a heavyweight, and I think it's something that you actually wrote about in one of your pieces for Bloody Elbow.
But I don't think anyone can deny that this fight, it might have been just a dispiriting outclassing. It does actually open the doors for a genuinely a fight that I think that everyone can be interested in, and that is, of course, Jairzinho Rosenstrike against Derrick Lewis.
No, it's actually I was about to suggest Shamil Abdurrahimov versus Jairzinho Rosenstrike.
I'd much rather see that. Lewis.
I can at least trust Shamil to go after him.
Yes. Boy.
Well,
Rosenstrike Lewis.
I feel like Rosenstrike Lewis is the fight to make now.
I think so.
They've waited long enough. Give the people what they want.
As a funny aside, I have a friend.
Another funny aside, for fuck's sake.
Yes, his name is Trey, and he's an amateur MMA fighter, and he's a very jovial type of person, and he always likes to alleviate everyone's self-esteem issues, and he usually punctuates that by assuring them that they're in fact bad, which led to the creation of a small in-joke where we'd comment on the various things that we share in our chat about any random thing that we share by going, is it Trey bad or regular bad? And this is the question that always pops up in my mind whenever I hear the title of the baddest man on the planet in MMA promos. Is the baddest man on the planet Trey bad, or is he regular bad?
Sure. Well, anything more to say? I guess I'll just finish up. Up what I was saying about experience, right? Gane didn't hit the body when he was finishing, or at any point really, but especially when he was finishing, would have been a great idea. Not necessary. It's heavyweight. That may not be a thing that gets corrected by experience, because it's just not generally necessary. Gane kept turning his back. Certainly heavyweight's not the only division where that bad habit persists. But, running along the fence with your back to the opponent, probably more forgivable at heavyweight than anywhere else.
I would say that in the potential matchup against Francis Ngannou, it would be something that I would consider alarming.
It seems like a very bad position to be in against such a puncher who also seems to have improved his pressure fighting footwork.
Ngannou may have improved, but it may be that he improved for all of one fight.
Could be.
One fight only.
Even if that's the case, Ngannou is, like Gane, unusually fast and athletic for this division. Unlike Derrick Lewis, who gets hit with one thing and is literally tripping over his own feet at several points in this fight.
And to go back to my previous point about Ciryl Gane showing this alarming tendency to back himself to the fence, is that it kind of made me concerned about whether Ngannou can, in fact, Rosenstrike him. Basically just run at him.
Just
and then unload.
Throwing bus driver uppercuts,
That's...
So, and the fact that he turns his back on strikes and that doesn't seem to be well tested in the kitchen against, once again, guys who are swinging them bungalows.
That's a very real possibility. I'd counter that by saying that when he is holding on to the initiative, at the very least, he'll go in and hit a strike and then have a defense prepared That happened several times. Again, Derrick Lewis, a very easy benchmark in that regard. You know that once he's thrown the left, the right is coming on a very predictable beat. But Gane did show that he has enough presence of mind in an exchange that he is dictating to like follow those beats through the sequence. That's not something most heavyweights can do. So I think the question of if he gets pushed around by Francis Ngannou or pushes Ngannou around, unsurprisingly, will be the biggest question of that fight. But yeah, he might get knocked out just running away and turning his back against the fence. Okay, let's take a break, fellas. When we come back, we're going to get to the people's main event, the cool people's main event anyway. Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz.
Absolute. Aside from those people who call themselves Aldosexuals, those aren't cool people, and in fact, I do not support them in any way whatsoever.
Thank God we heard your opinion on these people that no one who isn't online 24/7 has ever heard of.
What would you do? What would you do without me? You all like.
I don't know. Probably my usual show. I'd probably do my podcast too, man. Probably.
By all means, do your podcast.
I'd probably go with the show that I do every week without your help. After this break,
making a podcast is kind of like composing music, you know. You gotta pick your spots. You gotta emphasize certain things. And sometimes you gotta just let the bridge play out.
Aldo Munoz after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
So many goddamn markers for this episode. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're cruising on through the show, and that means, and when I say cruising, it's been more like a sort of death-defying sort of safari through a terrifying jungle, of which Tumen is only, one of the milder beasts. We've had crashes, we've had audio issues. It's a real classic Heavy Hands recording experience.
It's like trying to jumpstart a car in the middle of a safari with a potato.
Yeah. And it's also at Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
But we're ready now to talk about Jose Aldo, the moment that I have certainly been waiting for since I watched this fight live. A sensational performance from a fighter who, while way past his prime and fighting at a weight that should not be as easy for him to make as it is still just great. Jose Aldo basically took Pedro Munoz to school. Phil, you have to explain yourself. You picked against Jose for reasons of sadness hedging. Justify that now.
If Jose Aldo had lost, it would have made me sad.
Yeah.
Oh, so you pulled a Cyril, essentially. That's what you did on our staff page article.
Yeah.
You fucking cowards, both of you.
I picked Jose Aldo, and I love them more than anyone else on earth.
Sorry, didn't you sadness hedge Jeremy Stevens to beat Jose Aldo?
I don't know. No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. It doesn't sound like me.
This is far more acceptable.
That doesn't sound like
older
me.
And at a lower weight class and.
Well, I guess this
and
is
Pedro Munoz has more of a claim to being like a top 5 bantamweight than Jeremy Stevens does.
Well, Jeremy
Stevens is not a bantamweight, so he doesn't have a claim to be.
Well, you know what I mean. A top 5 fighter in a deep weight class.
I like how Tumen and I both went for the same insufferably pedantic correction there.
Yes.
The point is, this was a fight that I think you could sort of project Aldo's performance based on previous fights of Pedro Munoz's. I feel I did a pretty solid job of that. The openings that Jimmy Rivera found, even in his unsuccessful rematch with Pedro Munoz, all of the ways you can go around a pretty static, upright defense. The fact that Pedro Munoz does not have the subtlety of setup required to make weapons work against a good defensive fighter. As we discussed, Frankie Edgar took away the low kicks that worked so well against Rivera simply because he was so determined to counter them shortly after they started working. That was a factor here. Even the fact that we sort of discussed Aldo maybe not even being done after being hurt in the first round based on the Jan fight, I think we may be seeing more of a the bantamweight Aldo pace seems to be one of just gradually ramping up.
Jose Aldo's.
What's that?
Those things explain pretty well why you may have picked against Jose Aldo in this matchup prior to the actual fight.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, mostly it was just like Aldo's getting hurt in his fights with some regularity. Munoz puts people away when he hurts them, less than any like necessarily stylistic thing. Because we as Connor mentioned, we spend most of the time of the like breakdown just talking about what a tough matchup Aldo was for Munoz.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's just a good, dangerous, consistent fighter who still poses like lots of genuine threats to lots of, to many like ranked bantamweights to this point. You know, this was Aldo solving him, but this wasn't something that many people could do without Aldo's very specific skill sets.
No.
In fact, I don't think it was really something.
Oh my God.
Donna is fucking
hello
in and out.
Jesus Christ. I was still in the call. The audio just stopped. Fucking Discord.
Yeah, Discord is a bit of a fuck when it comes to recording audio.
Phil, you were saying, I'm sorry, I know you can't tell exactly where I dropped off, but
as I was saying, everything Aldo did is incredible. And in fact, when you study the fight game and when you study the history of the fight game, cases like him fighting 17 years into his career, 17 years deep into his career at a suboptimal weight class, where all his problems are incredibly exaggerated, namely the cardio problem and the sheer fact that he stops doing things past the 10-minute mark. And as well, he stopped doing things past the 10-minute mark in his previous outings at bantamweight. He, if anything, increased the volume in the third round and navigated Pedro Munoz brilliantly. But I guess we will get into all the nitty-gritty technical details and gush about them shortly.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing that we mentioned looking back at previous fights. We looked at Aldo's fight with Petr Yan. Not only did he survive a terrible first round, but that fight had a sort of arc of slowly ramping up the output and the volume. Round 3 was probably the craziest and the most damaging offense that Aldo landed in the entire fight. And this fight was much the same. Aldo got an unusually slow first round out of Pedro Munoz, and that was not an accident. Aldo was doing things to manage the pace of the fight and slowly ramp it up on his own terms. Yes, go on.
I suppose I have an explanation for that. Is that Aldo was trying to do the same thing he did against Pedro Munoz here against Jan, in that he tried to.
Oh my God!
The volume that Aldo expended in against Jan was justified by him trying to limit Jan's offense.
Right. So he's trying to, to an extent, these are things we've seen Jose Aldo do before, managing the opponent's pace. But I think we're seeing it, I don't know, it seems like a more conscious thing now at bantamweight, that he is trying to get a slow pace that he can control how quickly it ramps up. I think this is maybe the best controlled fight of Aldo's career.
Definitely.
Right? He structured this whole thing very deliberately.
He worked around all the limitations that he has at bantamweight and all the limitations that he generally has had during the course of his career, like in the best fashion possible.
Yeah.
And he fought the perfect fight that he needed to fight, in this case to win. And like with Aldo, the biggest knock on him during the course of his career, back when he was younger in his prime, is that he wasn't the most efficient fighter. In that all his strikes had a tremendous amount of stink on them, and everything had this crazy wind up, and all his defense was predicated on his incredible reflexes, and his head movement wasn't really efficient. Like, it was good, and no one could really lay a glove on him in his prime, but that was because he had an insanely pronounced athletic edge over all his opponents. And in this case, when his athletic edge has fallen off a bit and was curtailed, he ramped up the efficiency, and he honestly reminded me quite a bit of vintage boxers in a sense. The way he commanded over the pace of the fight, the way he punctuated his exchanges, the way he limited and controlled the exchanges and ended all exchanges on his own terms. Like, there are several instances where Aldo unloads with hellacious body hooks on Pedro Munoz, and then immediately punctuates that combination with a jab to reestablish range and circle away from Pedro Munoz. And this is just savvy veteran like shit that you only usually see in really educated boxers. And the way he prevented Pedro Munoz from entering the range that he wants to fight in, entering the pocket and extending the exchange by physically shoving his shoulder in Munoz's face and then pivoting off, or the way he touched Munoz to make him think that Aldo is still in front of him while pivoting away. It's just brilliant stuff.
Yeah, and we have seen some semblance of this kind of thing in the past. Like, there were echoes of old Aldo here. Like, round 3, Pedro Munoz comes out really, really hard, and Aldo responds ferociously, which is a classic Jose Aldo thing. The moment you're like, okay, I'm going to go for it, he teaches you a hard and painful lesson. But this fight, I think, had more than ever the feeling of Aldo not doing that because the opponent demanded it of him. Of Aldo really being in the driver's seat the whole time. Phil, you got something?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing. Like, it was him cutting it off before it could even get started.
Yes.
It was him recognized. It wasn't him being like, I'm going to brawl because this guy is compelling me to. As you mentioned, it was him just like, don't even think about brawling.
So my incredibly pretentious Twitter thread yesterday, one of my 2 incredibly pretentious Twitter threads, it actually inspired, I thought, some really interesting insights from someone that I hope many of our listeners will know, Kevin von Douglas Itu, who is the husband of Sylvie von Douglas Itu, who's a very good female
Muay Thai wife guy. Yeah,
Muay Thai wife guy. And he, so what I was talking about was that, I said that fighting is a temporal art form. It's something that a fight isn't a picture, it's something that plays out over time. And this is true in a really granular sense, like understanding how rhythm and tempo play out in specific exchanges. But it's also true in a broader sense, like a symphony or a novel, a longer story with many different little acts, many different little points of no return. And that got Kevin von Douglas Itu was responding to that and saying that first of all, he compared it to like the narrative way that Muay Thai is traditionally scored, right? Where you sort of that's how it is. It's a little more like pride scoring with shades of Western round by round scoring, where you're sort of like judging each movement of the fight like an act.
There is also a certain bias in Muay Thai against fighters who fight off the back foot, because it creates this nice image of a masterful fighter styling on a technically inferior opponent who is forced to always move forward.
Which is also why Muay Thai fighters like to trip each other and then swagger away. Like, this impression of dominance is openly embraced in judging, which is in a way is kind of refreshing because our judges have to pretend that they are not taking those impressions from the fight when of course we all intrinsically do view things in that sort of narrative way. But something else. Hold on one moment.
The scoring criteria. There's another.
One moment. I don't want to talk about Muay Thai scoring. Okay. Something else that Kevin said after that was that, narrative is not just, this is sort of like what I've said in the past about the art of bullshit. Narrative is not just something that plays out in the minds of the judges and the audience. It's playing out in the head of your opponent. You can decide what story the opponent is telling himself with a certain kind of fight. And that is what Jose Aldo did here, right? You can look at key moments in the fight. First round, all defense. He's just shutting Pedro Munoz out. It's almost like in a story you have like your inciting incident and the character's like, no, I don't want this. It's like Jackie Chan in a fight scene. He wants no trouble. Pedro Munoz won't stop pushing him, right? Round 2 begins. Aldo starts fucking cracking Pedro Munoz. He's now taking strong steps. Almost exactly halfway through the fight, he starts hitting Pedro Munoz with the leg kicks, which up to that point he has only dealt with on a defensive way. Halfway through the fight, he starts breaking Munoz down, and then Act 3, Round 3, he's just crushing Munoz. He's in complete command. At this point, Pedro Munoz himself is convinced that this is Jose Aldo's fight, that he has no place winning it. And I think you could see that by the end of the fight, like immediately Munoz comes up to Aldo, and I think he says something along the lines of, I have a long way to go to get to where you are. Jose Aldo put that thought in his head.
I mean, I think it's not even just, like from a metaphorical standpoint, cause, people saying, there's several ways they can look at it. Like, was he saying that from the perspective of his career? I haven't accomplished as much as you have. I'm still so far away from you. It's also like, the technical question that Aldo is, still able to outclass these, the young Punisher is somewhat of a misnomer at this point, as it sort of even was when he joined the UFC.
I have to point out that both Jose Aldo and Pedro Munoz are the exact same age.
Yeah.
And Pedro Munoz is only
like 2 days older or something, right?
Yeah, he's only younger by the metric of fight mileage.
Yeah. But still, so there was these questions of, being far away from Aldo in terms of, like skill and technique as well as career achievement. But it's also just, that was the basic narrative of the fight, and the real lesson Aldo taught him is that by the end, Munoz did not know how far away Jose Aldo was.
Right.
This is shown by the classic MMA fighter. I don't know where my opponent is. I just need to fill things with space. The resorting to spamming wheel kicks.
Yep.
He not only wheel kicks, he also threw a 360 crescent kick at one point.
Tornado kick. That was, great idea. That's going to work. You're absolutely right, Phil. In a very literal sense, he had a long way to go, longer than he realized in the moment, to reach Jose Aldo, and resorted to these understandable, but from a purely academic perspective, stupid ideas. Grabbing shit out of a hat.
The beginning of the fight was, he was landing punches, and they were being rolled, or Aldo was turning his head, or he was, they weren't landing cleanly, but somehow Aldo's punches were landing cleanly on him. He was going for the calf kicks, the thing which allowed him to beat Jimmy Rivera, and they were sort of landing, but
they didn't fucking work. Aldo checked almost every single kick.
Yeah.
The uncheckable kick has been checked by Jose Aldo over and over again in a very nonchalant fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone just basically went past him and he must have just been feeling like, I can't touch this guy, but he can touch me.
Yeah.
And, that's sort of the most impressive thing about it is that Pedro Munoz is someone who, given a war, will come forward almost, will come forward, forever. He's incredibly tough, as Tumen said. He's immortal. He's incredibly brave. But it was the fact that he must have just been feeling like he was like punching into like pillows, something yielding, something that wasn't like giving him any response.
Right.
And then eventually, it was whatever he was punching into was hitting him back harder and harder, and he just totally ran out of ideas. It was and it showed you how you can take away, like he kind of took away not necessarily the courage, but just the idea of what even to use that against.
He put him in a fight where bravery doesn't matter. Courage isn't the point. You have to come up with ideas. He made it like an intellectual sort of battleground that Pedro Munoz just does not have the depth. He's not equipped with the depth of skills to compete.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
I have to continue the theme of tortured metaphors. I have another one. The one I like is that fighting is kind of like cooking in a sense. You have to do lots of really small things really well. And while Jose Aldo was cooking like really intricate omelette with smoked salmon and herbs and all that stuff, Pedro Munoz was trying to just basically fry up eggs over easy and then maybe throw in some bacon, and he added too much oil, even though he was frying up bacon which already has fat in it, and it basically just ended up greasy and kept sliding off the pan, and it was shit.
I did actually also find myself thinking of food metaphors after this fight, because I remember thinking like that was so satisfying, and it was like I'd been to a restaurant and like had like you said, like a masterclass meal served up, and then I was like, oh, and now I have a Derrick Lewis fight, and it's like, and I don't necessarily hate Derrick Lewis fights for what they are, but it was just like, here is the sloppiest burger from like a fast food truck.
It was like descending in an elevator from the top level of a building where there's a 5 Michelin star restaurant or whatever, and then you descend further and further down, and then
Starbucks in the lobby.
Right at the found like near at the first story of the building, there's like an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah, basically, and you didn't want to eat all that much of it. Go on, Phil.
Also, one thing I wanted to say is like I find this fight also for me, and ones like it, they really complicate my idea of what Jose Aldo's prime is, because I think it's
like Anderson Silva.
Yeah, this is the most, like, he's obviously not physically, he's more hurtable. He's it's hard to say that he's slower after this one. I mean,
if you go back and watch him at WEC, he's definitely slower.
Yeah,
he's just,
that's true.
He was just insanely fast that he's still lightning quick.
But the point is, he's
doing insane things, but also against, like, it's notable he was doing this against, the featherweights of 10 years ago, who are both bigger and slower than your average UFC bantamweight. But I think in terms of like the coherence of his game, the ability to like raise and keep volume, to like bringing together, like, this is going to sound stupid, bringing together both his hands, like he's had like in his prime performances, they were often like very either jab centric or like right hand centric, like his ability to double, triple jab, his ability to bring his low kicks back in with all the kind of coherent like boxing game, the volume. in some ways, I feel like this is the most technical, coherent Jose Aldo we've ever seen. It's a genuine marvel.
It is.
And I kind of found myself thinking that after the Yarn fight. And so I find myself like really, I find where do you draw the line between this devastating physical force that he was when he first came to the UFC? And say, for example, if you wanted to match all these different incarnations of Jose Aldo up against different people, maybe the first incarnation of Jose Aldo is the only one I might pick to beat, say, Max Holloway.
Yeah.
Because he might just rip him to fucking pieces and not give a shit about trying to establish, like, defense or worry about Holloway's lead hand. But then you have this, slower, more considered, but, technically absolutely phenomenal version that we have right now. And he's just such a great fighter. And it's been such a privilege to see him work and to see him come back from, like, at least, well, now, the most embarrassing knockout in MMA history.
Yeah.
And then 3 of the most brutal prolonged stoppages.
Yeah. It's incredible. It is like Anderson Silva prolonging his prime, or really just like altering your conception of what a prime is. And I think it really comes down, like, this is why I love and why I have always loved Jose Aldo as much as I do. Yes, he's an incredible athlete. Yes, he's fast. Yes, he hits hard. Yes, he's mentally tough, but he's really, really skillful. And more than Anderson Silva, who we have to remember was fighting middleweights during that prolonged, protracted prime, Jose Aldo is using these skills in divisions that are like increasingly dangerous compared to the one he was fighting in during much of his reign. More punchers, more volume. These fights are just more violent. And yet he's doing these incredibly impressive things. And I think it just comes down to skill. Like, he's so skillful. If I had to put a point on this fight and attribute everything to one thing, it would be defense. And I've always praised Aldo's defense, but this was defense as a weapon. You mentioned before, Phil, like, taking things away from Pedro Munoz. There's a reason Munoz got to the point where he was just grabbing stupid shit out of a hat in the desperate hope that maybe something would accidentally work. Because systematically, Aldo took every single thing that worked for him away. To the point where Munoz was reduced to, like, tapping low kicks and dumb shit.
I mean, that's the thing with all-time great competitors. They always blur the lines, They always, they always push the boundaries of what you think is possible. That's what all-time great athletes do. And I think, I still think that Aldo is like, I think to me, it's not a question of whether he's still in his prime or not, or whether he is redefining his prime. He is irrevocably, definitively post-prime, but he is so good, he is so skillful that he's able to navigate that issue with a tremendous amount of grace. And I think it makes for it puts more of an emphasis on just how great he is as a fighter.
Yeah.
Not the fact that he's like redefining prime or anything. It's that he is able to do these things post prime, when he is not as athletic, when he's not as durable, when he isn't able to do the things that he was able to do, and he isn't able to get away with the problems that he's had when he was younger as a fighter.
Yeah. There's no doubt he's physically less capable, but it's just like, looking at this, I just found myself like, would the Aldo from the Mark Hominick fight have struggled more with Pedro Munoz than this one would have? And I don't necessarily find myself being able to answer those questions.
Yeah.
Like he's I don't think he has made up. We're not. There's no. It's possible to say.
You mean if Aldo from the Mark Hominick fight dropped down to bantamweight and fought Pedro Munoz? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, he was admittedly almost dying trying to make 145 then, but
because he would have basically just died right there.
Or would this Aldo, another way to, the opposite, would this Aldo, back up at featherweight, have had any more difficulty with Hominick than that Aldo did? That's also, it's not an easy question to answer because
true.
He's in many ways a much better fighter than he was then. And in other ways, worse.
He's a more skillful and a more coherent fighter process-wise, but is he a better fighter? Because when you talk about fighters and their attributes and skills, attributes decide a lot whether the fighter is able to hang in there or not at the elite level. Because at the highest level of competition, if you drop down 2 or 3% athletically wise, with regards to your attributes, that usually means that you're basically done. That's what we saw with many great fighters in MMA in recent history, pretty much in every single case. Like someone like Fedor Emelianenko, who is pretty much a shell of himself right now. And Jose Aldo circumnavigated that problem by being, once again, incredibly skillful.
Yeah.
And a long time ago, I've written a piece called the UFC's Meatpacking Plant, Part 3. It has to do with most of my gripes with MMA and the MMA meta and how MMA fighters approach, developing as fighters and MMA coaching and all that stuff. And in there, I tried to outline the baseline level of skill that I believe an all-time great competitor would be able to possess, and the MMA fundamentals that fighters need to grasp to become elite or just actually good. And I've outlined that fighters must understand the directionality of the fight, where they want the fight to go, and why do they want it. And Jose Aldo possesses an immense grasp of that concept.
Yes.
It's whether you should pressure, go on the back foot, or stay in the center and stand your ground. And Jose Aldo is able to do all those things. He's able to answer that basic question right away. And he's able to adjust. He's not just a mindless grinder who basically only does his own thing from fight to fight without growth or without adding skills and techniques that just basically make no sense. Because a common MMA adjustment would be to slap on like a wheel kick.
Yes.
That doesn't work with the rest of your style. And the most important thing is his ring craft. You talk about his defense, but I think his ring craft predicates his defense a lot. His understanding of ring craft is the best in the game, and I think, and I would die on this hill. That's even 17 years into his career, he is still ahead of the curve compared to 99% of MMA fighters, because he's just a student of the game. He takes knowledge from other more well-established combat sports, figures out how they work, and dare I say, he mixes the martial arts.
He really does. And somehow, in a way that nobody else in this sport does, grasps everything at once, super intrinsically, not to compare, I'm going to compare the sport to chess, but in the same way I have in the past, there's a thing that novice chess players do, meaning me, which is that you address a threat, and then a few moves later you forget about that. You're like, oh, this piece can do this. Right? And then you open up the threat again. And this is the level on which most MMA fighters exist in terms of ring craft, striking defense. Again, when Aldo takes a weapon away from Pedro Munoz, that's it. That's the gulf between them. Munoz doesn't know how to recreate an opening once it's taken away, because like most MMA fighters, he's just out there stringing shit together, seeing what works, and then a thing I've praised Munoz and other fighters for. This is a basic benchmark for the ability to compete in an organization like the UFC. When he finds something that works, he keeps hammering it. That is a good quality. But Jose Aldo can take that thing and make it not work anymore. And most people don't know how to deal with that. Jose Aldo can do all of those things. He can think in all these permutations. He is genuinely an incredibly rare creature in that he is truly a thinking MMA fighter. All the skills are so baked in that he can actually think about what's happening in the fight. Phil?
This reflected, back into his earlier championship career, where he had some, Dana White infuriating. I think probably Joe Rogan infuriating. And like,
oh, imagine if Joe Rogan was this,
cynical fights
on this commentary.
He what now, Phil?
He had some like genuinely entertainingly like cynical fights.
Yeah.
When the Hominick fight and Ricardo Lamas, where it was like, well, I'm up 4 rounds. This guy's taking me down. Probably could fight it.
But I'm fine.
Yeah,
I mean, fuck it, might as well. Might as well give him this.
Yeah, and they get mad. They're like, no, this is about spirit. It's, fuck that. Jose Aldo does it on skill and knowledge. He knows he's winning.
Well, he has a tremendous amount of spirit, and he showed it against Chad Mendes the second time around.
Of course.
It's not something that he relies upon all the time. He's not relying on attributes all the time.
That was the basis of my tortured metaphor. You don't just have all of these attributes and skill sets that are like a block and think, okay, how do these mash up against this other person as like a one big, all of these things existing at once? It's a network. It's a series, an endless series of flowcharts, different avenues down which you can take a fight, ways to manage something as fundamentally unmanageable as a fight. That's what Jose Aldo's deep and broad wealth of skill affords him, is the ability to make a fight happen the way he wants it to happen when the other guy is resisting and doesn't want to go down that path.
I think it's very telling that your average MMA fan's idea of why Jose Aldo started losing fights at some point, or when did he exit his prime, his athletic prime, is that he stopped kicking, and that's why he's post-prime.
Yes.
And now against Pedro Munoz, he started kicking again, and that's why he won.
Yeah.
And it's such it's so indicative of the overall MMA mindset that permeates all aspects of MMA and how MMA fighters themselves approach MMA. And Jose Aldo has an actual process. He has an actual thought out process through which he goes every time he fights. And to define a fighter's process, the way I define it is that a fighter's process is a complex of ideally complementary techniques that they use in tandem with their fundamentals such as ringcraft and footwork in order to win the fight. And Jose Aldo fits that description perfectly.
Yeah.
And there are not many MMA fighters like him who do that quite like him.
Yeah. Complexity is the word. Genuine complexity.
Yes. Depth.
It's
depth.
Yeah. There's nobody like him, folks. He's a special fighter and man, what an incredible performance to demonstrate all the ways in which he is, especially for this sport. The way we're talking about Ciryl Gane for MMA, take the opposite angle of that same idea. Jose Aldo for MMA is unbelievably good. The asterisk in Jose Aldo's case is that he's too good for this sport.
And to just gush about him some more, usually, I think I talked about it in the beginning, but once again, when you go back and watch his earlier fights, all his punches are so exaggerated. He's always putting 200% stink into every shot.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that one of my colleagues, Hexerized, hit upon, in that against Petr Yan, he was putting 200% power into the first shot, and then it was falling off because he was desperately trying to make that. And against Max Holloway as well, he was desperately trying to get them off him by basically trying to blast them out of there. And against Pedro Munoz, it wasn't like that. He was varying the power and rhythm on every shot he was throwing against Pedro Munoz. He was mixing in safety leads with really technical, really crisp, really he wasn't muscling his punches in as he used to. He was just letting his hands fly. And it's just, to be able to become so efficient and to improve and essentially basically look so improved form-wise, mechanics-wise, 17 years into his career. I cannot stress this enough. It is incredible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how do you do that? Most fighters are done after 10 years, 9 years of fighting, and then it's all a downward slope. For Jose Aldo, it's not like that. He may have declined in a lot of ways, but he's still finding ways through which he can emphasized his biggest strengths and curtail his weaknesses
and
that are much more exaggerated right now.
Yeah, in ways that he couldn't before, perhaps because he didn't have to. But yeah, it's important to note. Yes, he's declining in some ways. He is also getting better continually in other ways. It's
yeah, and I think just this last thing I'll say is that it's such like I sort of mentioned something about this on Twitter when I was saying that these are it's so much harder for fighters to keep with this sport because the fighters in every weight class get bigger and the pace goes higher. Yeah. And this works against fighters from a purely physical perspective. So Jose Aldo, has to cut down to bantamweight and then has to throw more strikes. It should, on the one hand, this is purely physically impossible. Purely
contrary goals
should be very, very hard.
Yeah.
But he's still managing to do it. But it's also just it's against what happens to aging fighters, mentally, even taking the physical out of the equation. Throwaway shots isn't what fighters start doing as they get older.
No.
People don't start getting better at throwing more volume. And, we've seen it with so many people from, Robbie Lawler onwards is that, even
they
guys
become
like
gun shy.
Yeah, even guys like Frankie Edgar, but people move towards power and away from volume.
Yeah.
And, if you were looking at something like the Moraes fight for Aldo, you might be thinking, yeah, okay, he's kind of trying to become just a big, scary banger. But
I would say that you could see him maybe approaching that type of thinking against Volkanovski.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense. But, to be able to learn from losses like that so deep into his career, it's just, I just can't help myself. I just can't help but gush about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just so against, physically and mentally, it is against what should be possible. So, yeah, just a remarkable guy.
Yeah. Well, guys,
also, I have
One
to
last
point
thing.
out, he spoke out in support of creating a fighters union recently.
Did he?
In a recent interview.
Did he?
He did. He said a union would be a great thing because fighters are operating from a disadvantaged position in negotiations, and a union would help that.
Good for you, Jose. It's really funny too because he did. If we're looking at this in a raw number sense, he did wait for the point in his career where most MMA fighters finally come around to saying that. Except that most fighters, that means they're retired. Jose Aldo's still doing it. He waited just as long, but he's still a viable contender. It's unbelievable. Okay.
Just insane.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm glad we got the chance to gush about it. So much so that I think what just happened constituted our second and third segments, and anything we have to say about the rest of this card is going to end up as a bonus. So forgive whatever awkward edit may have been in the middle of that segment, but we just had too much praise to lavish on Jose Aldo. There was too much depth to this performance. It shed so much new light on the entirety of his career, and it's performances like this, more than any, I put huge stock in title defenses and everything, but these are the kinds of performances that really stand out to me in terms of all-time great status. There are a few things as impressive as a legendary post-prime performance, and Jose Aldo has now had a good bit more than one of those, that continue to improve, and develop way past what should have been his prime. So, Jose Aldo, he's the goddamn GOAT. I think he's proving that more and more with each passing fight, and, thank you, Tumen, for joining us on the show. Do you want to give the people your, handle again and maybe just one plug, if you can limit yourself to that much?
Yeah, I certainly can attempt that in a certain sense. My handle on Twitter is @ChungusKhan03. Before I forget, and Jack Hurley, one of our staff members, would be very sad if I don't mention that. He's going to be wrestling on a folk style tournament this weekend, I think. It's called Stalemates, and he's going to be. The reason I'm bringing this up is that he's going to be coming out to the Heavy Hands theme song, "Bones in the Well."
That is so cool.
There you go. By the way, that's the name of the song. If you ever wondered what the Heavy Hands song is,
and based on the comments, several of you still are wondering.
Yeah, and I guess I plugged the very old article on MMA Fundamentals already, Meatpacking Plant, the UFC's Meatpacking Plant Part 3. And basically just check out the fight sites, check out our Patreon. We put out lots of stuff in there. I also recorded a bunch of alternate commentaries. Me and Ciryl and Julian Lung.
Nice.
Recorded alternate commentary for the card. So if you're sick of the UFC's commentary booth, there's your shot. Also, you can that offers you a way to watch fights for free. Well, not for free, for way cheaper than on Fight Pass. Very illegal shit right there. But I mean, a pirate's life is for me, I guess, or whatever. How the fuck that song goes.
Hey, just because
subscribe to our Patreon,
just because fair use isn't properly enforced doesn't mean it doesn't exist as a concept. You're adding transformative value to those fights. Yes,
exactly. I do not understand how USA law works, but there you go. Also, subscribe to our Discord channel. It's just $5 per month. You can talk to me in there because I'm very active online. A bit too active, one might say.
Yeah. And good luck getting a word in. Good luck getting a word in edgewise, though.
That episode we recorded with Connor, the Tengridom episode that has to do with fighter personalities, was prompted by a question from a Discord patron. So if you ever wanted your own personal question examined in such depth, just basically, there you go. Yeah. There you have it. You have an avenue to do that, to ask me to talk about something in depth.
You think the heavy bag's cool. We spent an hour and a half answering one question from a listener, and it was fun. I enjoyed that discussion a lot. Phil, anything you need to plug this week? I know there was a toe-to-toe preview last week.
Yep, we broke down all the technical nuances of Gane Lewis. No, this week I have enjoyed reading, I think, a piece by Ciryl Gane, who obviously wrote about Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz. I think it was called The Gravediggers
Tragedy. It came out today. Yes. A few hours before we started recording, in fact.
Yes. Yeah. Gravediggers are obviously continuing to be fucked in the ass.
Yep.
And all the way up.
Everyone. Yes. Yep. And also I read a piece by my partner in crime, David Castillo, which I think was basically, is Brazilian Navy Jose Aldo a new mythical creature?
Nice.
Lots of great, Jose Aldo gushing going on out there, and you love to see it.
Yeah, and if that isn't enough for you, I've got a Jose Aldo piece coming out this week as well. What can you do, folks? The man deserves to be written and talked about. I'm not 100% sure what the title is. Maybe Jose Aldo defense as a weapon, but that's what it is about, is Jose Aldo's defense and, how he uniquely manages to use that, to control, and dictate a fight.
And right after this, I'm going to have a recording session with Ed and Ciryl on the MMA, the Fight Sites MMA podcast, where we're going to talk about Jose Aldo once again.
Oh my God!
Some more, and then I'm going to make my own Tengridom where I'm going to gush about Jose Aldo. So basically, if you can't get enough of Jose Aldo gushing,
yes.
You got more where that came from.
Series of increasingly watered down discussions about Jose Aldo's greatness.
Yeah. And in the final Jose Aldo discussion is going to be basically like two guys saying Jose Aldo and going,
that was more or less this. All right. Well, thank you once again, Tumen, for coming on the show. Your first and last performance on Heavy Hands. Hope it was worth it. Phil, thanks as always.
Definitely. I got to bully you a lot during this recording, so that's always worth it, even if it tanks my career prospects.
Yeah, I like Kyle better. I'm bringing him back instead next time. Phil, pretty sure you'll be back next week. For people who want to...
That's because you have a fetish for British people.
That's right. Well,
The terrible, terrible teeth. And the horrible food, especially jelly beans on toast.
But if you want to find Phil and I on Twitter, you can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. I'm, of course, on there at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. Make sure you check out the Patreon. Not only will you be seeing the commentary I did with Kyle McLaughlin this week, and the commentary I did on Andre Ward versus Chad Dawson to accompany that, because I wasn't 100% happy with the quality of the one I did with Kyle. You will also hear any additional discussion about UFC 265's undercard, all of which has gone untouched because we just could not stop, vicariously jerking off Jose Aldo. So anyway, join us next week. I have no idea what the next card is. We got an empty weekend. Whatever it is, it's not going to be as good as this. But we will be here next week to talk to you about it. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.